Hello and welcome to the 36th Legislative District Online Town Hall. We recently completed the 2026 legislative session, and your legislators are here to answer questions and share what they are working on. We have Senator Noel Frame, Representative Liz Berry, and Representative Julia Reed here with us. My name is Alex, and I will be helping facilitate the discussion. I'll be asking questions that were submitted ahead of time by constituents, and we'll also watch the comments section for questions that come in live. We'll start with a brief opening statement from each legislator. Senator Frame, shall we begin with you?
Sounds great. Thanks, Alex. Good evening, everybody. I'm Noel Frame, your state senator here in the 36th district. It has been my immense privilege to represent and serve the constituents of the 36th for over 10 years now, which is kind of surprising even me. I serve as the vice chair of two committees, the vice chair of Human Services, where I work on issues related to child welfare, juvenile justice, services for our neighbors with disabilities, and also serve as the vice chair of finance for the Senate Ways and Means Committee, where I spend a lot of time thinking about tax policy and other revenue sources. We had some big developments this session, and I spent a lot of time this session working on the millionaire's tax, which I imagine we'll have some questions on. So thanks again so much for joining us today, and I will turn it over to my colleagues. Rep Berry, I see eye contact, so I'm going with you.
Thank you, Senator Frame. Hi, everyone. It's so great to see you all. I am so honored to have represented you since the 2021 session. I serve as chair of the House Labor Committee, where I work on issues relating to workers and employers for the state of Washington. I also serve as a member of the House Energy and Environment Committee, where one of my passions has been expanding recycling services and combating plastic pollution and microplastics and toxic chemicals. And I also serve on the Committee of Consumer Protection and Business, where I am really, really proud to stand up for consumers against powerful corporations' special interests. And one of the biggest bills I worked on this session was a bill to ban non-compete agreements in the state of Washington so that workers can freely choose where they want to work and not be prevented from doing so by their old employer. I am really looking forward to your questions today on everything and all things, and I'm going to pass it off to Rep. Reed.
Unfortunately, Rep. Reed, your sound is not coming through.
Woo! Wow, Rep. Reed, as the junior member of the delegation, really holding it down as the person who forgot to unmute. I'm Representative Julia Reed from the 36. Sorry if it looks like I'm coming to you from another dimension as well. I have the virtual background on this service is a little bit fuzzy on the edges, but it's great to be with you. I've been honored to be your state rep since 2023. And I serve as one of the vice chairs of the House Transportation Committee, where I get to work a lot on passenger rail advocacy. That's one of my big areas of interest, and also transit advocacy in general. I serve on the Housing Committee, where I've been leading up efforts to just grow more housing in Washington state, statewide, including the transit-oriented development bill, which we passed, which will allow more housing construction near major transit. And then I also serve on the Post-Secondary Education and Workforce Committee. I'm really committed to the opportunities that publicly funded post-secondary education of all types, whether it's 2-year college, 4-year college, apprenticeships, learning for young people, learning for older folks, career retraining, all that publicly funded higher ed can bring to the people of our state. I've been working really hard on ways to reduce costs of higher education, to make it less bureaucratic and easier to enroll in. And I'm excited about, in the coming sessions, working on kind of a big restructure about the future of higher ed in Washington. So it's been great to work as part of this delegation, these amazing ladies, and I'm excited to answer your questions.
Okay, we will begin the questions with one that was pre-submitted ahead of time from Melanie, who is curious about cell phones in schools, and specifically asked, why haven't you banned cell phones in schools? The time is long past for studying this issue. And Representative Berry, I think you wanted to speak to this one?
I do. And Melanie, thank you so much for your question. I couldn't agree more with you. As the mom of 2 elementary school kids right now, I'm already getting asked about when are we going to get our cell phones. And I have been so alarmed by the studies that have shown that cell phone use and social media use in our kids is leading to more depression, more anxiety, more self-harm, especially for girls. I have been visiting schools all across the city and the district where the teachers, the principals, the students, the parents, they're all asking someone in charge to do something, have some kind of rule around cell phones in schools. And what's happening now is a patchwork system because our state hasn't passed any laws, and actually Seattle Public Schools hasn't put into place a policy, which is one of the reasons I've been frustrated. That's why this session, I voted against the bill to study this issue yet again, because I think that we actually need action around this issue. Blue states and red states have passed policies all over the country regulating cell phones in schools. And I thought there was a really reasonable proposal in Olympia, which just said that every district in the state had to have some kind of policy using the guidelines that OSPI has on their website. It didn't say what the policy had to be. It just said you had to have one. And we are very frustrated here in Seattle because we haven't seen action around that. So when I asked why we're going to continue to study this and why the study needed to be pushed out so many more years down the road, the answer I got was that we needed to make sure we had proper student input. And with summer break coming up, there wouldn't be enough time to have the results ready by the 2027 session. That was, again, not acceptable to me. So that's why I voted against the bill, because I wanted to see us actually put action on this issue. I do have good news for you, though. I have been in contact with our new superintendent of SPS schools and with members of the school board. And I do believe we're going to be seeing some kind of SPS policy coming out in the next couple, maybe months, around cell phone use in schools. So even though the state has failed to act, to my dismay and disappointment, I believe Senator Frame and Rep. Reed agree, we're going to see some action here through SPS for at least our community. So thank you for your question. I feel very passionately about this, as you can tell.
All right. Our next question is about one of the biggest bills that was considered in the 2026 legislative session, the millionaire's tax. And Jeannie asked a question about why is the millionaire's tax not going into effect until 2029? And so, Senator Frame, we're closely involved with this policy, and I think can speak to Jeannie's question and perhaps to the policy more broadly as well.
Sure. Well, thanks for the question, Jeannie, and I'll answer the question directly first and then kind of pull back and talk a little bit more. So the good news is that the implementation of the bill is starting almost immediately. It takes time to set up an entire new tax structure. This is pretty complex tax policy. So it's going to take a bit before we can actually have it up and running, but glad to report that implementation will start almost immediately. Frankly, we've already had a lawsuit filed against us. We expected that would happen. And in the bill, we said, despite lawsuits, despite ballot challenges, we are going to continue toward implementation, which is what we did with the capital gains tax, so that we are ready if we are upheld at the ballot and upheld in court. So that's step one. Step two is the tax actually goes into effect in 2028. So folks will be responsible for taxes effective January 1, 2028, but we won't have the first collections until April 15th, 2029. We won't be doing estimated payments that first year so that we can have a baseline in year two. But once we get into year two, we will start doing estimated payments as well. So we won't have to wait a full year each time to get payments. So that answers your question directly, Jeannie. For folks kind of generally interested in the millionaire's tax, I will just say this is the biggest step forward in progressive tax change in about a century. The state of Washington has had, the most regressive tax code, and now most recently the second most regressive tax code in the country, second only to Florida, because we passed that capital gains tax and the working families tax credit. And the passage of the millionaire tax is that next big step. We are trying to rebalance the tax code to have our wealthiest neighbors pay what they owe in taxes, and we're trying to give working people a break. And we did do that in the bill as well. We expanded the working families tax credit again, just like we did in 2021. We expanded the small business tax credit again, just like we did in 2021. And we also made some changes to sales tax so that things at the grocery store, your food is already sales tax exempt, but we expanded it to include over-the-counter drugs, diapers, personal care products. So just about everything in your grocery cart should be sales tax free moving forward, with a few exceptions, really trying to strike at the heart of affordability and how our tax code contributes to that. So really proud of that work. I imagine we'll have other questions about it, but it's a big step forward. Thanks for the question, Jeannie.
Okay, and our next question is a transportation one. And so we'll go to you, Representative Reed, to talk a little bit about Zachary's question. How can we ensure light rail is completed all the way to Ballard?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Zachary. Thanks for that. It's something that I think all of us in the 36 LD are really committed to. I know Senator Frame was able to go out to the rally about saving our trains, and it's something, you know, we all care about. We're spending a fair bit of time trying to engage the Sound Transit Board. I think one of the most important things we can do right now is really message to the board that it's not okay to just take Ballard off the plan permanently. We still have a lot of work to do. Sound Transit still has a lot of work to do to find cost-saving measures for these lines that could significantly impact what we can build now and in the future. And we still haven't exhausted all of the options that we can take for assistance through the legislature either. So there's a lot more work to be done, and Ballard should absolutely remain in the plan. Hopefully we can keep it on track, or at least as close to on time as possible. But there's a lot we can still explore. And what we don't want to do is to say like, well, things look bad now, so let's just cut Ballard off the plan and then we'll never think about it again. We know what happened. Like, the reason we're building trains now is because we didn't take an opportunity to do it when we had a chance 30, 40 years ago. And I really don't want to see that happen again to Ballard. So continuing to message everyone on the Sound Transit Board about how important Ballard is and keeping Ballard on the plan on time. And then we, your legislators, are working on the inside, trying to connect with board members and trying to make sure we're exercising just every opportunity. There's a real budget issue at Sound Transit, but also we're talking about long-range financial planning, and that means that some of it is based on projections that are going to change a lot. So we want to make sure Ballard stays in the plan. We continue to consider it. We're getting the building done. We're able to build out more of the light rail line in Snohomish County and Pierce County, and we think we can do that without pitting Seattle against the rest of the group.
Okay, and our next one is from Miranda, who is concerned about funding for our local public schools and making sure that the state is contributing full funding to keep schools open. And this is obviously the state's paramount duty, so something that we'll all be able to speak to, but we'll start with you, Representative Berry.
Thank you, Miranda, for your question. I am the parent, as I said in my first question, of 2 elementary public school students. Noelle also has a kiddo in kindergarten in the public schools. We care deeply about this issue, not only because it's personal, but because we know how important it is for the state's paramount duty to fully fund public education. I'm also the proud daughter of a special ed teacher and a former school board member in my community. So this was ingrained to me at birth, let me tell you. But I am really proud that in our difficult budget years that we've been experiencing over the past 2, 3, 4 years, we have doubled down on funding from the state for K through 12. Last year, we passed a budget with over $2 billion in new funding for K through 12 education. We removed the arbitrary cap on special education funding that school districts get from the state. We increased funding for this fund that's called MSOC, which is materials and school supplies and just inflationary items like paper and paper clips that go up, helping schools pay for that. I think something Noelle can talk more about is, you know, voting for the millionaire's tax, which the 3 of us voted for. One of the reasons I strongly supported the millionaire's tax is because it's going to provide $3.5 billion every 2 years for healthcare, K through 12 education, and childcare, which are priorities that I care deeply, deeply about. So I want you to know that the 3 of us care a lot about this, and I'm really proud that the state has doubled down on this as we've had a lot of budget challenges over the last couple of years, and that we are also thinking about that for the future as well.
Yeah, thanks, Rep. Berry. And I'll just add the point on the millionaire's tax. Right now, the way that the state contributes our portion to school funding is in part the state property tax. And a couple of things I want to say here. One, we actually just passed a law to actually update it. So our property tax statements are actually going to say state school levy now. So people start to understand that our property taxes actually go to public schools, and we're consolidating the 2 levies into one for ease of administration and transparency. So coming to you next year. But second, the property tax thanks to an initiative from Tim Eyman, has an artificial cap on growth of 1% as opposed to matching population growth or inflation. And so structurally, it limits that tool in contributing funding to public education. With the millionaire's tax and income taxes more broadly, like as a public policy, actually are better aligned with economic growth. So we believe that, using the millionaire's tax as part of the funding mix for public schools will actually help us grow public school funding over time. And the way that that was designed, we put that in the general fund, of which 43% goes to K-12 today. It also helps us with bonding authority to help with school construction. That's also a benefit of how we structured the millionaire's tax. So I think we will get there. And I echo what Liz said about the deep commitment to uphold our paramount duty. We have been making consistent investments, as Rep. Berry said. I will say in tough budget years this year, I'm really proud to say, although we had to make some cuts to K-12, they were not cuts to basic education, which was a very key priority for me, and really being like using a scalpel for cuts as opposed to a butcher knife, right? And so we did a really good job of making sure that we preserved basic education funding, even though we had to make some cuts around the edges. I'm so proud of that as well. Thanks for the question.
Okay, our next question is from Martha, who had a question about measures taken by the legislature this session to prevent the rights of and privacy of transgender people. I think, Senator Frame, we were going to start with you to speak to that.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And, I'll just say we have been in a multi-year effort, particularly around our young people who are trans, and really protecting their rights, and have been in a bit of a back and forth as it relates to so named parental rights bills. We have passed some legislation. There was an initiative. We passed some legislation to refine it. Unfortunately, we have more measures going to the ballot. So that is, I'll just say, a tricky conversation for us to navigate as a state, and we'll see where we end up on the ballot measures. Because those are going directly to the ballot, whatever passes at the ballot cannot be modified by the state legislature for 2 years. That's a matter of fact. I will say that we are taking both from the legislative route as well as our executive branch. Our attorney general has been filing lawsuits, in response to the Trump administration attacking our trans neighbors, particularly our trans kids, to try to protect gender affirming care. And, we have prevailed in those lawsuits over time, but the attacks continue. And we know that the Trump administration is engaging in scale surveillance on all sorts of fronts against our immigrant neighbors and against our trans neighbors as well. And one of the pieces of legislation that we passed this year, Senate Bill 6081, expands protections that we already had in place about disclosure of information on driver's licenses. And we expanded that to include gender identity information, so that, again, we can protect our trans neighbors. So we are trying to be both proactive and, unfortunately, reactive to the actions of the Trump administration, but doing the best we can in very trying times. Thanks for the question.
Okay, and we will move on to housing, one of the biggest issues before the legislature. Patrick wrote in saying, I'm a renter and I do not see a pathway to being able to afford buying a house in Seattle. We need more affordable housing, exclamation point. Representative Reed, would you like to speak to this one?
Sure. I couldn't agree more, Patrick. And we've been working really hard in the legislature the past few years to pass a whole range of bills to try to build more housing and more affordable housing in Washington, and also to invest more in the Housing Trust Fund, which helps us build permanently affordable housing. I'm really excited now that those bills have passed to see their implementation over the next few years, and we're tracking that closely. This last session, I also passed a bill, House Bill 1687, with the support of these two ladies, which supports Seattle's Social Housing Public Development Authority, which is a new authority that has been chartered by the voters to build mixed income housing all across Washington, or all across Seattle. 1687 was a bill that the city requested just to make it easier for them to work with social housing developers and relax some housing regulations to try to get those social housing projects on the ground faster. I'm also really excited. I just had a chance a couple days ago to connect with Tony Yukis, who's a local housing advocate in this area. We talked about the Fort Lawton housing project, which has been long overdue, something we've been waiting for, something I worked on back when I worked at City of Seattle, which was before 2020, and is going to bring a lot of new affordable housing to the Magnolia area. So we're very excited about that project. So there's a lot of things underway. There's more we need to do, and we need to make sure that these laws are implemented correctly. And also another thing we're going to be probably taking a close look at over the next few years is permit fees and costs to get building permits. One thing we're seeing is that new building starts are down. That's kind of true in a lot of places. It's partially because of tariffs and the cost of materials. It's partially because of interest rates and the cost to borrow money. But if there are any levers we can pull at the state level to make it less expensive to build so that we can have more housing, that's what's ultimately going to help us bring down the cost of housing. So we're trying to build housing that's permanently affordable, that you can own. We're really excited. I know Habitat for Humanity just opened one of their biggest projects. That's a multi-unit ownership apartment building in Capitol Hill, which is really amazing. We're trying to make it easier for you to stay in the housing that you're in right now, and we're trying to make it cheaper and easier to build new housing in Washington. So more to come, but we are working on those pieces.
And I thought I'd just jump in and say one thing. Hopefully you guys can hear me as I was having technical difficulties. We actually have several great homeownership assistance programs at the state of Washington, down payment assistance programs. We expanded that for particular communities with the Covenant Homeownership Act for communities that were historically discriminated against through redlining and other policies that prevented them from having access to homeownership. And those down payment assistance programs are great if we fund them. So we have been putting more and more funding into the Housing Trust Fund over the last many years. Like every year, it's been the most we've done than ever, and it keeps growing. And I'd love to see us continue to make those investments in the homeownership down payment programs. I will say, full disclosure, I am a homeowner because of that program. And I don't think I would have been any other way. And I'd love to expand that opportunity to more Washingtonians, particularly more residents of the 36. So more money for housing. Here we go.
Excellent. And our next question is from Jennifer, who is concerned about the Federal Health and Human Services changing access for vaccines and other preventative medicine. How can we make sure that we have science making these decisions for Washingtonians?
I'll take that one. Jennifer, I completely agree with you. It is terrifying to me that the federal government has made a directive that we should be taking scientific medical advice from political appointees and not doctors and scientists and public health professionals. And this has been a scary time for a lot of people around this issue, especially for my family, because I've got small kids, trying to figure out if we're going to get access to vaccines that we want to have access to, if our insurance is going to cover it. There have been some pretty scary conversations with our healthcare providers about vaccines. And so that's why I'm really proud this year we passed a bill, House bill, I believe it was, let me just check, it was 2242. And what it does is it allows here in Washington State, our Department of Health to make vaccine recommendations instead of the federal government and the CDC and HHS, which makes me feel really secure because I know here in Washington, we're paying attention to public health experts and not political people in Washington, D.C. who are trying to score some kind of points with, their opinion about what we should be doing. So I'm glad that we are holding up our values here in Washington. And I very much acknowledge that this is a really uncertain and scary time, but I'm proud that we're doing something to stand up here. Thanks for the question.
Okay, and our next one is more on the energy and environment side of things. Paul asked about data centers. He says, data centers are wasting water and driving up utility bills. We need to ban data centers in Seattle and Washington. I think Senator Frame, if you'd like to begin by speaking to the data center issue.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Well, thanks for the question. And I couldn't agree more. I've had concerns for many years about data centers, going all the way back to about 10 years ago when I toured one for the first time out in central Washington. And I think the awareness of the impact that data centers are having on our environment, on our electricity grid, on our water supply is becoming more apparent, not just here in Washington, but all across the country. And we're subsidizing that through our tax policy right now, which again is where my concerns have come. So I am really proud to share that we passed my bill, Senate Bill 6231, and repealed part of the data center tax preferences, which I think is a huge step in the right direction. We repealed the part about refurbishment, which means we're no longer going to give a sales tax exemption when data centers refresh and buy new servers 12 years later. For a hot minute, we had a bill that was going to repeal the whole thing. Sadly, we didn't have the votes for that when it got to the Senate floor, only in Ways and Means, but we'll be back. So I think that we should stop subsidizing these data centers through our tax policy. And I personally would have loved to see a bill pass House Bill 2515 from Representative Dolio, our chair of the Environment Committee in the House, that had some really great work on these sort of high demand, high load demands on our grid, like data centers, to have reporting and sustainability reports and just other provisions to just have some checks in place to protect utility ratepayers and the broader community at large. Unfortunately, it died in Senate Ways and Means. It was a very frustrating moment for me and others, and I hope Rep. Dolio will bring that back. House colleagues, if you have anything to add, feel free, because I know you guys debated it at length in the House, but really hoping we'll see that come back.
Yeah, I'm hoping that people are hearing about it from their constituents as they are back in their districts over the interim. I think that that building that constituency and base is super important, and I think data centers, like any business, should pay their fair share and be properly regulated, and not be creating major environmental burdens that we, the utility ratepayers, are then having to pick up the tab for. So there's a lot of work still to be done. And of course, I think pro data center folks, or I shouldn't say necessarily just pro data center, because I wouldn't say we're anti, but people that support deregulation, there's a pretty well-paid lobbying contingent trying to push that point of view. And so we're trying to push back and stand up for our communities and just having common sense regulations like we do for any other type of business. Especially one that has a significant environmental footprint.
Okay, and another energy-related question about the rapidly rising cost of utilities and your electricity bill, and what is the state doing to address this? And that was from Tyler. If somebody would like to speak to that.
Well, I think all of our work around data centers to make sure they're paying their fair share is definitely something we're going to continue to work on now into the future. But we also passed a bill this year, House Bill 1903, that will establish a statewide low energy assistance program to be administered by the Department of Commerce, so that utility companies will be required to have energy assistance program for their customers. Because I am telling you, this is starting at the beginning of this session, so starting in December into January, this was one of the top issues I started hearing about from all of you, was concerns about high utility costs. And I think that this is also an issue. It spans all political parties, all different kinds of rural communities, urban communities, suburban communities. People care deeply about this issue, and they want to see their elected officials acting. And we hear you, and we see you, and we were proud to vote for this bill, and we are determined to do something around data centers in the next session. So please be assured that we are working on this issue.
Okay, and our next question is from Megan about, who says that they oppose online identification bills. So a bill that might ask people to present identification to use a certain website or something like that, that would censor, and this is their words, would censor and invade the privacy of people trying to use the internet. It would not protect children. It would lead to online abuse of people's identity. It could be stolen, accounts hacked, and people doxxed. Now, there's been a lot of debate in the last, especially this year, about this sort of online privacy and protections kind of thing. Senator Frame, would you like to start on this one?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And thanks for the question. And I get that bills that are crafted too broadly might have the type of implications that you are mentioning. I can share that the piece of legislation that I was working on that sort of is in this space was something that was very narrowly crafted. That was Senate Bill 5708. It was actually Attorney General request legislation about protecting children from addictive algorithms on social media. And the question of age verification and the technology that these companies have, I mean, frankly, it's quite the debate. We were trying to limit the impacts of the need for age verification. I think we actually believe that these companies have the capability to, make pretty informed assumptions about age of users based on all the things they do already. Like, for instance, not marketing alcohol to minors. They are using pretty complex data sets for that. And it's like, why can't they also use that to protect children from their addictive algorithms? The answer is because they don't want to, because that's how they generate revenue. And so we are in quite a conversation and have been over years about how to construct this legislation carefully and narrowly so that we are protecting children without being overly broad. So I'll just say I hear the concern, and I think there are things that we need to do, particularly to sort of address the just catastrophic impact of social media on the mental health of our children. We've had some good bills about AI and making sure that, for instance, it's tangential to your core question, but we had passed a bill about you can't say you're a nurse if you're actually AI. And so you can't be like Nurse Jen if it's not actually Nurse Jen behind it answering. It can't be a robot, right? Things like that, having some disclosures around AI. I don't know about you all. I think I'm getting better about AI disclosure, but I have parents who are 75 and 82, and they're having a pretty hard time deciphering this. And we're passing legislation about proper disclosures. I'm trying to teach my own 5-year-old son about, ooh, that's fake, and this is how. So there are things that we need to do to protect particularly kids and vulnerable people from things in technology, but you're right, we need to not be overly broad. So feel free to add, seatmates, but that is my take on that question.
I think you did great.
Okay, and our next one is going to be a more local question, specific to a neighborhood right here around the 36th, from Lisa, who lives in Greenwood, and says, I'm concerned about the safety of Aurora. Nobody goes there except to drive, and the whole scene is so unwelcoming. How can we create places people actually want to go and feel safe? And some of this may be a city issue, but Aurora is a state highway, and so open it up to our legislators here to speak to safety on Aurora Avenue.
Yeah, I could speak to that if you guys want. So, this is such an important question. We have all been working for many years now with an incredible community coalition, the Aurora Reimagined Coalition, which is just a group of dedicated neighborhood volunteers who have been working to raise awareness about how to improve connectivity in Aurora, all the way up and down the Aurora corridor. And they organize walks for lawmakers to really help them understand firsthand the many kind of dangers that are posed by Aurora and the lack of crossing and the way that it breaks up communities and transit between schools. I've been on several of these walks. On one of them, I was on with Senator Javier Valdez, and he and I almost got hit by a Metro bus that was driving on Aurora, and we were walking in sort of the footpath that kind of acted as the sidewalk. And man, that would have been a really bad news day for everybody. But I think really shows that the Aurora Reimagined Coalition is very effective, because nothing really drives home that experience like experiencing it yourself. And I know so many of our constituents do experience that every single day. And so I was recently on one of these walks. Mayor Wilson was on that walk as well. A number of other legislators were there. I know Liz and Noel have both been on them in previous meetings. And that was really great. It's going to take a partnership between the city and the state. There are things that the city can do, and Aurora Reimagined, I think, has a really good list of kind of low-hanging fruit options for creating better crosswalks and more safe crossing areas. There's a lot that the state can do in just ensuring that, you know, Highway 99 is a state highway, but that doesn't mean that it's untouchable and it has to stay in exactly the same form that it's in right now. There's a lot we can be doing to partner for greater safety. We also have been successful in preserving a $50 million grant in the transportation budget that I believe was originally proposed by our predecessor, Senator Reuben Carlisle, as part of a community vision to restore Aurora. We've been fighting to make sure that money stays intact so that the city can propose a plan for how we're going to use it to rethink that whole corridor. I think Aurora can be a huge asset to our city, but if you look at it, and Aurora Reimagined has some great photos of this, it looks pretty much the same as it did when Highway 99 opened. And our city has changed a lot. And that lack of pedestrian infrastructure, that lack of creating an inviting environment, that's what allows crime and sketchy activities to proliferate. And so we want to have an Aurora that connects our city, that doesn't separate our neighborhoods, and that's safe and well-meaning. So we're working really hard with the city to think about how we can improve that. My personal vision, I'd love to see a future with better transit connections and stops, and maybe even bus infrastructure one day, bike infrastructure one day, but that requires making the roadway a lot safer than it is right now. So we are working on it, and we really appreciate those issues. And if you're interested in supporting that work, really encourage you to look up Aurora Reimagined Coalition and get involved as a volunteer. It's a really great group of folks.
I'll just add one tiny note, which is if you just go on Aurora north of 145th and you see what Shoreline's done to the physical plant of Highway 99 in the parks and the medians and the lighting and the trees, it can give you a pretty big insight into the difference it can make with the physical, the built environment of what we choose to do. And we're hoping that we'll make some serious progress on that, as Rep. Reed has said, with that $50 million investment that has been set aside for this work. So that part of Aurora is no longer the eastern boundary of our district. It was for many, many years, but it's part of our district, and that our constituents are traversing it every single day, and we'll continue to keep a really strong eye on it. So thanks so much for the question.
And then we have one from Chris now. Chris says, I thought we banned plastic bags. Why are they still at stores? They say they are recyclable, but I don't think anyone does. Representative Berry, you've worked a lot on plastic waste issues. Do you want to speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Chris. I love questions about recycling and solid waste management and plastic waste and microplastics. That's something I care passionately about. You are right. In 2021, we were one of the first states in the country to regulate plastic bans at grocery stores, for example, carryout bags. And being one of the states that goes first, we've learned a lot of things along the way. So what we did in 2021 with that law is we banned the quote unquote single-use plastic bags. So the really thin plastic bags that people were using once and then throwing away. And the problem with them is not only the plastic pollution in our waterways, and our roads and our highways and our parks. It's also that those plastic bags, when you put them in your garbage, get caught up in the machines that at the solid waste management facilities and wreck those machines and also cause harm to the workers. So what we did instead in 2021 is we said we can't use those really flimsy bags, but stores can give people for a fee, and now it's 12 cents a fee, the thicker plastic bags, thinking that people will reuse them. Well, what we're finding is people are not reusing those bags. They are also using them as single for one time and then throwing them in the garbage. So our experiment did not work. And now we are moving towards a model that other states have adopted, like California, of just saying all together, you cannot have any plastic bags for sale at grocery stores, for example, but you can have paper bags and canvas bags for sale for people to reuse. And so that bill, so we had a bill this year that would have done that. It did not pass out of the House. And I honestly, there's a lot of opposition from retailers around this, and that was a very powerful voice to overcome this year. But I do think that we will be successful in sessions to come because people truly do understand that these plastic bags are not being used in the way they're intended to. And not only are they a nuisance in our homes, but they're causing an insane amount of litter, and we can do better knowing there are other alternatives. So thank you so much for that question.
Okay, and now we have a question from Cassie, who's concerned about how the state is preparing for more funding cuts that could be coming from the Trump administration, whether that's in healthcare. There was a recent story about housing vouchers and higher education. From a budget perspective, would one of you like to speak to the federal funding potential for cuts from the Trump administration?
I'll just say that. Oh no, sorry. I thought you were leaning in, Noelle. So I was
having a hard time finding the mute button. The reverse problem of earlier, Julia.
I believe in you.
Okay. Do you want me to go?
Yeah. Why don't you go?
Okay.
And then I'll jump on after you.
Okay, great. So, I mean, the first thing I would say is financial independence from the federal government is mission critical. Which is why it's so important that we do the work on our tax code as we did this session. In the earliest days and the earliest actions of the Trump administration, the states that were the most leveraged with federal dollars were the ones that were most susceptible to frankly, being coerced by the federal government. So us having, our revenue structure in place and thinking that through is important. And I will say, and I was having, frankly, a conversation with an Oregon legislator just a couple of days ago about this, as the federal government continues to eliminate full agencies and minimize what they're doing, they are quite literally shifting the responsibility of services to state governments. And so state governments are really having to think this through. Best example that I can give is healthcare. We were one of the states who, more than most states in the country, really took advantage of the Affordable Care Act to reduce how much of our population was uninsured. We had one of the lowest uninsured rates in the country, and the Medicaid cuts resulted in coverage losses for 400,000 Washingtonians. That's what we're looking at. So, for instance, we had a piece kind of connecting the dots with that in revenue. We had a piece of legislation this year that, unfortunately did not pass, but I'd like to see come back, that basically said, if you are an employer and you do not offer health insurance or offer such a terrible plan that your employees don't want to take advantage of it, or you just structure your business in a way that the state is basically subsidizing your employees with Medicaid, we're going to charge you a fee so that you contribute to the cost of that. And we have a pretty good plan with Medicaid. I can tell you as a small business owner, the price per person, per member per month for what we get compared to the private market, it's pretty good for the quality of the plan that it is. And these large corporations that are shirking their responsibility to their employees should pay into that. That's the kind of stuff that we're having to think about now because the federal government is abdicating its responsibility to provide for healthcare for the American people. So those are just a couple of examples, and we're going to have to continue to be creative. I mean, we have stepped up funding and investment in food banks because of the cuts to the SNAP benefits from the federal government. Frankly, I think it's a big part of why funding school meals and the millionaire's tax, we are now going to have universal school meals for school children, breakfast and lunch. I think people are thinking a lot about affordability with the cut of food benefits. So we are sadly having to respond in real time to many of these things, but we're being thoughtful and creative about how we can be economically independent from the federal government in many respects because of the decisions that they're making right now. Thanks for the question. Wish it wasn't necessary, but thanks for asking.
Great job. I'll just add that one of the things that's important in this time too is we're really trying to think about what are the most essential services that we provide as a state and how do we put ourselves in the best financial position to ensure those continue to people without interruption. So Senator Frame just named a whole bunch of them. They're really important. And sometimes that means we won't be able to get as much funding for things like one-off projects in the district that maybe we used to get funded. We'll still ask, we'll still try, But we're trying to exercise some more just fiscal responsibility as your reps to make sure that we have the money available for the things that we might have to pay for from that the federal government used to cover, which means we don't have as much flexible funds always available for some of the one-off things we want to do. So that's just something you can kind of expect as we're going through, but still ask us and we'll do our best to fight for everything we can for the district.
And Julia, I just want to put a fine point on what you just said. I know we got a question somewhere in the chat about like, why should you guys be trusted with more money? And I'm just going to say, like, our constituents believe in the services that we are paying for. They want us to make investments in childcare access. They want us to invest in healthcare. They want us to invest in our public schools. In fact, they demand it. And I agree that not everybody sees eye to eye about the size and scope of government, but for who we represent in the 36th and who the majority of our, legislature represents, this is the expectation that we have from our constituents, and we are making those investments. People want to see us invest in affordable housing, et cetera. So people can disagree about the size and scope of government, but for what our constituents are asking us, we are making those investments, and we believe in the ones that we're making.
Thank you. And our next one is for Representative Berry about a bill that you sponsored. This was a live question we got in about what is being done to keep elected officials safe from harassment. Bill you sponsored, HB 2333, failed. And so people's personal information is still out there. Would you like to speak to that bill and next steps on the issue?
Yes, thank you for the question. Look, the reality is political violence is on the rise, and that should alarm all of us. And collectively, we must say this is not okay. You are represented by three young, we are considered young in the legislature, young women, women, people of color, younger members face more political harassment and violence than other elected leaders. I am not new to this issue. I am the former legislative director to Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. 15 years ago, my boss was shot in the head in an act of political violence. 6 other people died that day, including a 9-year-old girl, a federal judge, and my friend and colleague, Gabe Zimmerman, who is the first congressional staffer to be killed in the line of duty. Now we sit before you, the three of us, having faced our own very serious threats of political harm and violence in this role, and that is unacceptable. We need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that elected officials have access to the proper funding to protect their homes or private homes and at public events they attend where people may know they're going to be. We also need to make sure that there are proper protections around, where we live and home confidentiality with addresses. We had issues this year. There have been other really scary incidents over the last 6 months with Minnesota Speaker Melissa Hortman being assassinated at her home. Obviously, the horrific assassination of political activist Charlie Kirk at a political event. It is real. It happens on both sides of the aisle. And it's something that we need to confront now as Americans in this country. It's an issue that still needs to continue to be socialized. I found that, with colleagues in the legislature who haven't had their own scary incidents, which I don't wish upon anybody, we're having a hard time wrapping their head around some of the protections that we were asking for that now are being passed all around the country and are becoming very common sense and not unique. So I do believe this issue will continue to come back because we want good people to serve and not be afraid to serve for their own protection for themselves and their families. So thank you for the question. We're going to continue to bring this up. And this is something that we hear from judges. We hear from local elected leaders. We hear from statewide elected officials. This is something that a lot of people are thinking about. And a lot of you are thinking about. I hear a lot about this just walking around from people because it is so much in everyone's mind. So thank you so much for your question. And we'd love your support when we bring it back next year.
Okay, and the next issue is one we've actually gotten a couple questions about. We had a pre-submitted question from Joel about this, and then we also got a live question from Tyler about the idea of a Washington State public bank. Is this something that we can establish a public banking network in the state? Tyler says he's ecstatic about the millionaire's tax, but concerned about the amount of interest we pay to private capital and how public funds are tied into Wall Street banks. Would one of you, perhaps starting with Senator Frame, like to speak to the public bank issue?
Yeah, go for it, Noelle.
Yeah, I'll say some initial remarks, and then seatmates, feel free to jump in. So I'll just say I'm a longtime supporter of the concept of a public bank, and it's had various iterations, but I've supported it every step along the way. We've had some very, very active members of the 36 working on this for quite some time. Yes, we love the 36. And I think part of it is the 36th district really has a long tradition of working on finance. Rep. Summers was the chair of the Appropriations Committee. Then Rep. Carlisle, Rep. Tarleton, and myself were all chairs of the Finance Committee in the House, and now I'm Vice Chair of Finance for Senate Ways and Means. I mean, this is the space that our district has worked in for many years. And I agree, the fact that we are paying interest to private banks, it makes you scratch your head about, couldn't we use those dollars more effectively? I will say one thing that's really exciting to share, and people have sort of theorized on this for some time, that we could build a public bank by using some of our existing loan programs. And in the most recent capital budget, we created the Washington Builds Program, a revolving loan fund using the Climate Commitment Act dollars and doing, I think, a $25 million initial capitalization. So we are taking like real tactical steps to move in that direction. Yeah, and I know there's some other efforts abound kind of at a Seattle level too that I'm really excited about. Somebody came to one of our events and told me about the Seattle Loop. So a similar kind of concept, but at the municipal level. So I think these are all really exciting ideas and we should keep working on them. Liz, Julia, anything you'd want to add?
I think you summed it up so nicely. Go State Bank.
Our next question is one about state pensions, and Anne asked about what will legislators do to overcome the injustice of older state pensioners struggling with inflation and cost of living increases. There's something in the budget. I don't know which member might prefer to start with this one.
Yeah, go ahead, Julie, if you know. I was trying to check where we ended up.
Yeah, I can speak to it quickly. So, I mean, Noelle probably knows the budget a little better than I do, but we were able to pass a temporary COLA increase for the PERS ones. That's the oldest retirement plan recipients. A lot of those folks in that plan are women, are elderly women who were teachers who were not paid as much as their male colleagues when they were teaching and are now kind of the last remaining state retirees. So as the daughter of teachers, it's very important to me. I meet with the PERS One Coalition several times in the course of the year. I know you all do as well. We were not able to meet their main goal, which is to get an automatic COLA built into the process every year. And that was because it was explained to me because of budgeting challenges and just the complexity of the state budget and a lot of uncertainty coming up. So we've made some progress, but we got to keep working on it. It's something that I care a lot about. I meet with these women, and it is mostly women, and you know, they've really served our state well. They were great teachers and they're retired and they deserve to have security in their retirement. And I don't like that they have to come back to the legislature every year to ask for us to do the COLA increase when we could do it automatically, but it does take it is a fiscal challenge, and so it is going to take some budget work in the future. So something we are working on, and it's urgent because a lot of these folks, again, they're older. They don't necessarily have the privilege of waiting a decade to for us to fix this problem. So I just want to say, anyone from PERS One Advocacy who's listening, we hear you. Thank you for coming and holding us accountable, and we will keep working on it.
Okay, and we are coming to the end of the hour, and so I think we will do sort of a closing statements and last question for each legislator, talking a little bit about maybe wrapping up the discussion we've had tonight, and then talking a little bit about some of the bills you maybe have your eye on for next year. You know, it's obviously a long ways off, but some of the early issues and early bills that you're going to be thinking about as we go into the 2027 legislative session. Senator Frame, we'll start with you.
Oh, sure. So it's funny because somebody asked this question in the pre-thing that we hadn't gotten to yet, but I'm going to say it now. So I introduced Senate Bill 5211, which is the companion to the bill that the person wrote about, to pay parental caregivers for caring for their children that have complex medical needs, developmental disabilities. I had that legislation the last two sessions. I intend to bring it back next year. And what's happened since is that parents of those children have sued the state of Washington. Sadly, in our state, sometimes we legislate by lawsuit. These parents have waited too long, and we know that these children are not getting the hours that they deserve as the hours they get from the Developmental Disabilities Administration. Families are having to leave jobs, get second mortgages on their home, et cetera. So again, as the Vice Chair of the Human Services Committee, developmental disabilities is in my portfolio. This is a bill that's super important to me and will continue to advocate for. So thanks for the question, and look for the next iteration next year if the parents don't beat us in court first. Who would like to go next, seatmates? Who's ready?
Well, I just wanted to close by thanking everyone for being on here tonight. We really appreciate hearing from you. We love engaging with you. We're about to slip into this time at the beginning of May where we are going to be switching to our re-elections. And so we aren't able to communicate proactively with you by sending you proactive communication via email and mail and these kind of town hall events. But that doesn't mean we can't respond to you directly if you reach out with a question or concern or a bill idea. We get some of our best ideas from all of you. We meet with you and hear from you and read your letters and your emails. And I'm going to continue to be looking for those and thinking about what I'm working on next year. But I think affordability is going to remain a top concern, as well as how do we stay strong against attacks from the federal government. That was very much the theme this year. And I think that will continue to be the theme in at least the next session to come. So thank you so much for being here tonight, and just know how much it is an honor to serve you and how much we appreciate hearing from you and engaging with us tonight.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's so great to see everybody and to chat with you. Send us more questions and reach out. Invite us to things. We love to come visit and tour and meet people. Or if you have like a local neighborhood gathering and you want us to just like come and chat, we're available. I'm really going to be spending a lot of next session, I think, working on higher education reform. We're entering into this really interesting place for higher ed just nationally. We have fewer kids being born. So the cohort of people going into post-secondary education, and this again is like all types, not just four-year college, is shrinking. Also, at the same time, colleges and universities, especially publicly funded ones, are under a lot of economic and cost pressures. They have a lot of fixed costs, and there's often operating in systems that were designed for a time when there were a lot more students and it was a lot cheaper to operate a university. So you're seeing a lot of universities close, private and public universities. And there's a lot of strain across the system. I saw somebody put in the chat that they work at the UW, and now because of budget cuts, they're doing, three people's job. And one of the things that's challenging about higher ed is we don't have a higher education funding model in Washington State. So if you're a K-12 school district, you get funding from the state based on how many students you enroll. There's, other factors. It's not a perfect system, but there is sort of like a system that encourages you to keep enrollment up because that's how you address your funding. We don't have a system like that for higher education. Colleges and universities submit budgets sort of based on what they got last year and kind of what they want to do next year. And I think it makes it really easy for budget writers, no offense, and this is no shade on our current present company, but I think it makes it easier for budget writers to cut those budgets in ways that aren't necessarily strategic, because they're not sure what those budgets represent. And it makes it harder for us to advocate for more revenue for those budgets, because it's easy for people who would be paying those taxes to say, well, like, the schools are so wasteful and, you don't know what you're getting and you're just pouring money in, and what are you getting out of it? And it makes it hard for us to hold universities accountable for doing what I think is the purpose of public universities, which is acting as an economic and an elevator and an opportunity elevator for people in our state. So it's beyond time that we had a really working higher education funding model in our state, and that we really took a hard look at systemic higher education reform so that we can have a strong higher ed system for the next generation. So that's going to be a big focus of my work over the next session and probably sessions to come.
Thank you very much. And that is all the time we have this evening. So if we didn't get to your question, you can always reach your legislators by phone or email. Their contact information will be on the screen momentarily. And thank you so much for watching, and we look forward to keeping in touch.